It's you.
Well, I bumped into online James Romeyn and LeJeune and AudioKinesis when I was seeking out a subwoofer for my, I call it the TV room. It's the movie theater, I guess. And I really wanted something that I'd had one woofer before, and I've had two, and two was better than one. That was pretty obvious. And I really didn't want to have the electronics in the box, particularly this time, because that's what went south on mine. So I saw their system, and then I found a review in the Absolute Sound and saw that it was on their favored products list for subwoofers. But the idea is wonderful, and I like the fact that it wasn't terribly expensive and that the amplifier is a separate device from the woofers. So with that, and I should also say, besides that, AudioKinesis certainly has made their name with the Swarm, but they also make some other really terrific speakers that have gotten terrific reviews. So hopefully we'll hear about all of that from Duke and James.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The Swarm has probably been, our most successful product, and it's based on the ideas of Earl Geddes about how to get accurate bass in a small room. The biggest challenge in small rooms is in low frequency region is the room itself. Okay, there will be an inevitable interaction between the subwoofer and the room that will result in a rather severe peak and dip pattern. Okay, and you can fix that with EQ at one location. You can reduce the magnitudes of the peaks and dips somewhat with bass traps. I mean, nothing against either of these, but Earl's approach is a little bit different. Earl uses Earl suggested using 4 small subwoofers spread asymmetrically around the room. And so each one will interact with the room differently, have a different peak and dip pattern. And the sum of these 4 dissimilar peak and dip patterns will be much smoother than any one alone would have been. And smooth bass is fast bass because a frequency response peak in the bass region will decay into inaudibility slower than the rest of the spectrum. So smooth bass literally is fast bass. And by smoothing out the frequency response, we are addressing the issue that matters most to the ears in the bass region. The ear is not very good at hearing time domain issues, but it is very good at hearing frequency response. For example, it takes the ear at least 1 full cycle to even register the presence of bass energy. And if you think about how long wavelengths are in the bass region and how far it is from subwoofer to floor, ceiling, sidewalls, room boundaries, by the time you are even aware of the presence of bass energy, the room signature is all over it. Okay, and we have to hear multiple cycles to detect the pitch of a bass signal. But if you look at a set of equal loudness curves, you'll see that equal loudness curves up at say 1 kilohertz or so, they're the 80 fawn and the 90 fawn curve are fairly far apart. Then as we get lower in frequency, they get closer and closer together. So down at maybe 40 hertz, the 80 fawn, the 90 fawn curve are maybe 5 decibels apart. Up here, they were 10 decibels apart. Okay, so the implication of that is that a 5 decibel difference at 40 hertz is subjectively about as big as a 10 decibel difference at 1 kilohertz. Okay, so that's why things that we do to improve the frequency response in the bass region, they pay disproportionately large dividends. That's also why it takes so long to dial in the proper loudness setting for your subwoofer, because a little bit of movement of that level knob results in a large perceptually large change in loudness. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling probably, but anyway, that's sort of the general idea behind the Swarm is to get smooth in-room bass, and that smoothness tends to hold up well throughout the room, okay? Because the peak and dip pattern of each sub will change as you move around the room, and it will change as you move each subwoofer. But having 4 dissimilar peak and dip patterns will trend towards smooth pretty much everywhere you are in the room. And why 4 subwoofers? Okay, my original goal was to make a subwoofer system that would keep up with dipoles, quads, Maggies, speakers like that. I was an amateur speaker builder for many years, and I thought, boy, okay, the first guy who can build a subwoofer system that's fast enough to keep up with Maggies and quads, that guy might actually be able, you know, have a marketable product. So I tried lots of different subwoofer enclosure types, transmission lines, aperiodics, sealed box, low tuned vented box, equalized dipoles, isobarics, just about everything except for a horn. And none of them really would keep up with my Maggies and quads, okay? And it wasn't until Earl shared his idea with me. Actually happened at Consumer Electronics Show 2006 in January 2006 in Las Vegas. I was taking Earl to the airport after the show, and we were stopped at the stoplight at I think it was Tropicana and Koval, okay? And the light was red, and he says to me, "Oh, Duke, by the way, I figured out how to get smooth bass in small rooms. 4 small subs, spread them around asymmetrically, some of the different patterns, sums to smooth." And I said, "Wow, can I license that idea from you?" And he said, "No, you can just use it." And then the light changed, and it was that fast. The only credit I can take is I recognize that was what I was looking for. That the problem I'd had all along was not the subwoofer, it was the room. Yeah, subwoofers do better than others, but the biggest issues were room interaction. So that's what we're trying to get right. And there, you know, different schools of thought of how to get good room interaction in the bass region. Clayton Shaw uses dipoles, and dipoles are better than monopoles. Okay, as far as smoothness, but the in-room smoothness goes up as the number of spread around bass sources increases. You can think of a dipole as 2 monopoles back to back, separated by a path length, and of course in reverse polarity. 4 distributed subwoofers is approximately as smooth in room as 2 monopoles. So they keep up with a pair of dipoles.
Cool.
But they generally go deeper and have better impact.
Oh, they go deep.
Yeah, the Swarm goes fairly deep. You know, 20 hertz ballpark.
Yeah, I thought the room was coming down on me during one movie.
Have you watched Master and Commander?
Not since the subwoofers.
Yeah, it's beware. I think they mixed those. Those are real life artillery shots, and they're mixed pretty close to what the level would be if you were standing on the ship. They were really maximizing realism in that movie. And of course, the funny coincidence there is that Robert E. Greene, who did the review for the Swarm, he taught Russell Crowe the violin.
Yes.
For that movie. And I don't want to get off on a tangent about movies, but here I am. And I was alone with Robert for at least half an hour at THE show when he came in. I guess it was what, 16 maybe, or no, earlier than that, 15 maybe. I can't remember.
I don't remember
that show.
Yeah, I think it was 15.
But he said Russell got to be pretty darn good on the violin. Of course, Robert E. Greene is a concert violinist of the very high, at a very high level. And he said, oh, he went into this thing headlong, and he wasn't just gonna fake his fingers moving. He was actually learned how to play the violin. So anyway, but yeah, those cannon shots are loud. My room is 3,300 cubic feet. And when those cannon shots happen, it's a dual use room. It's a perforated retractable screen, so there's zero impact when the screen is up. But I just have to reach for the remote, and I have certainly not heard the subwoofers stressing even a little bit on those cannon shots. So I don't think any music would be quite as dreadful as that as far as stressing the woofers, but maybe Duke could speak to that if that's true or not.
I think cannon shots is about as stressful as it gets. You might want to have that subsonic filter switch engaged on the back of the amp if you're going to play master and commander at reference levels.
Good thought.
So Duke, is there a particular way you set up the system to optimize it? How do you, like, do you just randomly put subs around the room?
Well,
Is
there's several different placement strategies. One of them is let's say one sub in a corner, usually a front corner. Okay, two subs along one along each of the walls opposite that corner, and each of those a different distance from its nearest corner. Okay, then the third sub somewhere else, and again a different distance from its corner than those other two. That would be an example of a way to do it. Another placement strategy that I have on my little write-up is find 4 places in the room where you can put a subwoofer and put them there. In other words, it's very forgiving. The location of any one sub is not critical. Jim uses a probably the best setup strategy, which is he uses the subwoofer crawl. Jim, you want to describe what you recommend?
Well, I stole it. The original reasoning was I was copying some guy maybe we've heard of, you might have heard of Bob Carver, I think is his name.
Yeah, Bob.
And Carver's recipe for setting up his single subwoofer was located at the listening area, at the sweet spot. I don't know if anyone, yeah, you're nodding your head. You remember reading that, huh?
I read it, and yeah, I took the simple method out, but yeah, it was fascinating.
It was interesting, yeah. So he does a mirror image instead of having, you know, a sound level meter at the listening, at the sweet spot, and then walking around the woofer, and every time you move a few inches, go look back at the sound level meter. You set the woofer at the sweet spot, try to get it up even at ear level if you can. That's usually not impossible. And then you use a sound level meter and walk around the room. Well, I'll first say what Carver mentioned, how he said to do it. He said if you want a lot of bass, you'll find a place in the room where there's a lot of bass. And if you want it to sound more, I don't know what the term he uses, musical or smooth, then you find where it's not as much level. The way I'm interpreting this is Bob is saying, if you don't care about the irregular response, just go for the most, wherever you hear the most bass. But if you do care a lot and you want it smooth, then you're going to find kind of an area in the room where there is the least amount of boundary effect, where it should hopefully be the smoothest. So that's what I'm looking for. So for the first subwoofer location, there's one, you're just hearing one subwoofer at the sweet spot. Walk around the room with a meter, or actually, I think the first time, few times I did this, I could even just hear moving my head near the floor where the woofer would be. And you just find this area about 6 inches wide, and there's just kind of a null there, and the bass actually sounds quite a bit different than it does outside that little null point. So you put the, I guess you would call it either the first or the second woofer. You're going to call it the second woofer. Locate it there. Repeat that same exact process. Listen to 2 woofers now, and you'd only have to test it in the areas where you would be able to cite a subwoofer. And it seems to work pretty good. You just continue this process. And of course, the last subwoofer, the fourth one, is the one at the sweet spot. So if you find that last a little null point and move that woofer, the fourth woofer, the one at the sweet spot, to that location. And then we just have to find which one sounds the best with the polarity inverted, which is usually the last step. That's usually your last step too, isn't it, Duke, as far as
Yes. Often I recommend to people, if you're using one amplifier, invert the polarity. I usually find that inverting the polarity of one of the subwoofers will result in smoother in-room bass. And usually it seems that ends up being the subwoofer that's furthest from the main speakers. Okay. We also have customers who use two amplifiers, and there are advantages to doing that. And in that situation, what we suggest is driving the two subs on the left side of the room with one amplifier, two subs on the right side of the room with the other. And not by left and right, I don't mean they're up against the wall, but towards the left side, towards the right side. And then set the phase controls on the amplifiers so they are 90 degrees apart. So that puts the two sets of subs in what's called phase quadrature with one another. What this does is it simulates the sort of phase difference of the two ears that we might experience in a very large acoustic space. Now, I'm going to go off on a little bit of tangent here that we can come back to this concept a bit later. In the listening room, there is a competition between two sets of acoustic cues. There is the room that you're in, the small room that you're in, and then the recording, the venue cues on the recording, okay? And to the extent that we can minimize the small room cues, we make it more easy for the ear to accept the recording cues as being dominant. And this is something that we play around with quite a bit, and we do it in elsewhere in the spectrum, other than just in the bass region, but even just doing this in the bass region can greatly increase the sense of immersion and envelopment.
So the recording space is easier to ascertain.
Yes, exactly.
The recording space itself.
Yes.
Your room doesn't step over that as hard. Yeah.
Exactly. Normally the room superimposes its footprint on top of everything. If your speakers are close to the wall, well, you don't get a whole lot of depth of sound stage and that sort of thing. Okay, well, that has to do with reflection times and things like that, and we manipulate that somewhat.
Right.
But that's not woofers there. That's something else.
Yeah, I love it. I love it when there's one jazz album, I have a Chesky album, and the saxophonist playing baritone sax, he's in my laundry room. I don't know how he got in there, but he's always there. We should do the laundry.
It is interesting how realistic the sound effects are in movies. I have to say, sometimes watching a horror movie or some scary movie, and you'll just hear a knock on someone's door, and I've literally been so fooled that I actually thought, how did somebody get down here in this basement room and it's knocking on the wall? And it's pretty strange.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's seen Black Hawk Down has a phenomenal soundtrack on it. Have you seen that?
No, I've got it. I'll play it tonight.
It's Middle Eastern original ancient instruments, and to me, I don't know what the sound field is going to be like in your room, but it sounds like the front wall is like 100 feet back. It's just you get some cues on a really good audio system watching movies that are just phenomenal, maybe more so even than two-channel, even the best two-channel.
Yeah.
It is nice having a system that's, right in the bass for both movies and music, that's for sure.
Explain the difference in Deborah and Swarm.
Footprint. The Deborah's footprint is a little bit wider and a little bit narrower, and that was Jim's idea. There's Jim, at least from where I sit. And so it hugs the wall a bit better, doesn't stick out into the room as far. They're functionally essentially identical, but I like Jim's idea of making the footprint a little bit more room friendly.
All right. So what's your business relationship in terms of that? I mean, in terms of AudioKinesis, just so we understand.
We're friends.
There we go.
And very good friends. Jim has helped me out enormously in product development. His wife also. We've pulled resources. We've pulled ideas. We don't have a formal contract between us. We trust each other, and we look out for each other. We're both more inclined to look out for the other person than to look out for ourselves. And
That sounds good.
so it's our relationship is a friendship. And yeah, I get a kickback on every set of Deborah's.
Yeah, I was going to say what the
it's
difference
not
is.
purely altruistic, okay? But
I get no kickback, as it should be, when Duke sells the Swarm, and I have to give him a little token of my appreciation for letting me copy it for each of my sales. I think I'm back. I think I owe you one, as a matter of fact, right now.
okay. Well, I'm sure I owe you for something, so put it on my tab.
Okay. Yeah, so one of the interesting angles that turned out in my favor is that we have a particularly phenomenally good cabinet guy up here in Preston. He used to be, 5 minutes from Duke, right?
Yep.
Did you ever walk there? I was always
No, I never did, but
you could have, though. I mean,
yeah.
It would have been too long. It would have been, if you had a dog and you wanted to go for a walk, it would have been a good walk. Well, and it just so happens that this guy's work is so good, and his prices, it's a family-owned business, and he's only 45 minutes to 50 minutes north of me. So Duke ships me crossovers on the speaker projects that we are working together on which we work together. And then I get the cabinets up there in Preston and bring them down here, and I do final assembly. And I used to do assembly years and years ago for another Bay Area manufacturer. So it wasn't too big of a stretch. The Duke stuff is pretty similar that I'm doing as far as assembly. And then pack them up and ship them out of here, out of Preston, including the new super stand that I just posted last night on my website. So that's a pretty exciting product, and a new separate space generator. There's only prototype images, but that'll be up there on my website, I guess, within about 3 weeks. And another speaker project that we're working on.
Jim, we had a question. Oh, we have a question from Jim, from Jeff Kalina. He said, how much would be added to in terms of the cost of the system if you were to offer a wireless hookup?
A lot.
I'm gonna leave it to that guy. Yeah.
It's really not practical because we're using a central amplifier, okay, to drive multiple subs. How do you get the signal to the subs? It's got to be wires, okay. If you want to do a wireless swarm, then I suggest getting 4 wireless subs, okay. The concept that we use does not have to be implemented only the way we do it, okay. It's an idea that can be implemented in other ways. I mean, the Swarm and the Deborah are the individual subs are designed to work together. They take into account, for example, room gain from boundary reinforcement and the way they sum higher up the base region is differently from the way they sum down at the bottom of the base region because of how far apart they are. But anyway, but all of that with possibly needing some EQ can be done with 4 wireless subs, but if you're going to get 4 subs, each with its own built-in amplifier, get somebody else's subs, okay? Because we don't have the economies of scale to be, competitive doing what, big companies can do doing that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're gonna stick with what we think we can do well in that regard.
Yeah, the subs, your design or the way you want them laid out, at least the way I did it, was they face the wall. They're only about the depth of my molding off the wall. So the driver's facing the wall. So you
Yes.
just see the back of the box and the top of the box.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It looks like a block of wood.
Looks like a block of wood.
Yeah.
And the thing with wireless subs, you'd have to plug each one of them into the wall. So there's a wire.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I hate plugging anything else in, because then it seems like I always get hung because I'm on a different circuit or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah. So sorry, wireless isn't really something we're planning to offer.
I want to just interject, because it has come up with people I've talked with. If you go with powered subs, let's just say not wireless, where you do have to power it with a RCA or an XLR, you really do have to make sure that the source has enough current to drive multiple subwoofers. And the trend seems to be, with most of these subwoofer amps, including ours, that the impedance is pretty low. And if you had 4 of them, if you parallel that with a typical solid state amp, you'd be looking at some horrendously high current that would be needed, I think, to appropriately drive that.
Yeah. Do we have another question?
Yeah, somebody asked if they're ported or sealed.
The answer is yes.
That's right.
That's a good answer.
They're ported boxes that are tuned fairly low, tuned about 21, 22 hertz, something like that. Now, the target curve, though, is not flat. Let me see if I can figure out which way. Okay, so the frequency response is the native frequency response is gently sloping down by about 3 decibels per octave before room effects. Okay, typical room gain from boundary reinforcement is roughly plus 3 dB per octave below 80 hertz, 100 hertz, something like that.
Mhm.
So that's built in. So it's a low tuned vented box. Then of course below the tuning frequency, the response drops rapidly. Now, in some rooms that results in too much bass. Okay,
Yeah.
so we have plugs that you can insert into the port. The ports are down firing. You put in the plug and tighten it up a little bit, and it forms a very solid airtight seal. The plug is actually a plumbing part, so it seals good and tight. And then you have a low Q sealed box, QTC or QTS of ballpark 0.5, and often what works well for people is some boxes sealed, some boxes ported, and so there's a lot of adjustability in the system. Okay, there was another question came up, and I didn't quite catch it.
It says here, are power amplifiers and crossovers included?
Yes.
So
yes.
can you describe?
Yes. Okay. The amplifier that we use is a Dayton Audio amplifier sold by Parts Express. Dayton Audio is their house brand. It's called the model SA1000, part number 300-810, I think. It's approximately 900, approximately 1,000 watts into a 4 ohm load, and it has a variable frequency low pass filter to roll off the top end of the sub. It does have a built-in 80 hertz second order high pass frequency. The low pass filter is 4th order, variable from something like 30 hertz to 180 hertz. I don't recommend running the Swarm or Deborah up to much north of say 80 hertz or so under most situations, because the subs that are closer to you than the main speakers you don't want them passing upper bass energy loud enough to be audible. So you don't
Right.
want. Okay, and if you have to cross over higher, well, we can use multiple amplifiers and cross over the front ones higher than the rear ones or something like that. And then the Dayton amplifier also has a single band of parametric EQ in case after you've finished positioning subs and playing around with ports and phase and all that, you still have a problem. Well, you can EQ it. And a distributed multi-sub system is actually a very good candidate for equalization, because if there's still a problem, it's probably a global problem. It's probably throughout the room, because the sound is going to be very similar throughout the room. So if there's still a problem you need to solve, by addressing it with EQ, you're probably solving a problem throughout the room, instead of, if you just have one sub and you're fixing a peak or a dip at the listening position, well, you're making it worse elsewhere in the room.
Right.
So what we do does work well with other strategies to getting smooth bass.
And it is a Class A B amp for those who
Yes,
want
it
to
is.
know.
Yes, and my understanding is that the guy named Bob Carver may have had something to do with the circuit design. It is a fantastic amplifier. I've only had one fail in the field after the first couple of weeks. Occasionally, with electronics, if it's going to fail, it's usually going to be early on. Yeah, there have been a few that failed early on. Parts Express, swaps it out, no problem. Had one that failed after about 4 years and 10 months in the field. Warranty was 5 years. Parts Express replaced it under warranty. So it's a good amplifier.
I think I have one that's about 13 years old. It's never hiccuped. And the other one, I've never heard of any failures. I just had a customer that thought, well, here's one that failed. It was brand new. And the black and red, there's 2 pairs of black and red posts, and he, I guess he had wired up 2 red ones instead of a black one and a red one. What are they? Are they vertical or horizontal? I guess they're in a square pattern, so it was easy to confuse,
Yeah.
that if you don't look closely at the colors. So he did not have a failed amp, and they don't generally fail. This might be a good time to mention that one of your members, I'm pretty sure he's a member. Yeah, he is a member. He might be watching right now. He ended up, and some other customers have used different frequencies, but his room is small, and he had some pretty bad, like small meaning like 12 by 13, I think. And he had some pretty bad modal effects that he wanted to filter out on his main speaker. So he ended up crossing that with a series capacitor at 150 hertz, which I thought was amazing. And he did use 2 amplifiers, but as I recall, he did not stagger the frequency front and rear. But again, his room was so small that maybe the distances were not that great. So the company that offers that feature built into their amp is, there may be others, Aesthetics. Am I saying it right? And they have a little switch in the back, and you just flick this little toggle switch or whatever, a little slide switch, and you insert a series capacitor at the input to the amplifier, which introduces a 6 dB first order slope. So he ended up buying some really expensive capacitors. We're talking like 0.03 microfarads that were in the $70 range.
Yeah.
I know you can spend more, but I thought,
Yeah.
I mean, even a metal foil capacitor that from my regular source is about $2, I think, or $1, a couple dollars for a pretty decent, metal foil cap, but he went a little crazy.
Someone's asking, do you time align the woofers with the main speakers? And do you suggest rolling off the main speakers?
Okay, I suggest rolling off the main speakers if they need it, okay? If they need to be protected. Otherwise, okay. the problem is not with rolling off. The problem is, what are you going to use to roll it off? Okay. What Jim just talked about, a series capacitor, that's probably as clean as you're going to get. Okay. If you're using other types of filtering, okay, well, now you have something in the signal path to all your high frequencies that you may not want. Okay, so there can be trade-offs in whether or not it makes sense to roll off the main speakers. Okay, it's as far as time aligning, again, the ear is relatively insensitive to time domain at these long wavelengths, and so I suggest optimizing for frequency response rather than time domain response. If you can do both, nothing wrong with that, okay? But I would definitely give the priority to the frequency response over the time domain response, because that is what we register with our ears, much more so. Are we done with that?
I think that covers it. Let's
Okay.
see. I had some other questions. I see.
Okay.
Well, J.R. Boyce Claire said that was me that James was talking about.
Ah, yes.
Yes. And let's see. Someone had a question about somebody else's product, so feel free to answer or not. So, do you have an opinion on sub products that offer auto equalized, like Sonos Faber?
I think that's a great idea. I have nothing against it.
Yeah.
If you can, roll your own swarm with four or however many subwoofers your wife will let you get away with. The reason I stopped at 4 in the with the swarm is in room. One sub or 2 subs are generally smoother than 1 sub. Okay, if you have them spread apart. 2 subs are twice as smooth as 1. 4 subs, twice as smooth as 2. 8 subs, well, that's grounds for divorce in most states. So I stopped at 4.
Yeah, yeah.
So yes, nothing at all against using EQ.
I remember when Duke first mentioned, this was a great idea using 4 subs. I thought about 2 or 3 too many.
Yeah.
But my room, I feel sick to my stomach just when I think about it. I think I spent it was more than $2,000 or $3,000 on treatments, and it was professionally done. I spent $750 just on the plans by a guy that really knew what he's doing back then. This is about 17 years ago, 16 years ago, and the results were mixed. They really weren't that good. The results were very mixed, but it's a lot of it may sound like a lot of subwoofers, but it solves so many ills that it seems like it's pretty worthwhile. Somebody suggested, and it was a great idea, and I haven't done it yet just because I haven't. There was one of Duke's customers that has basically a cube, but about a 12 foot by 12 by 8 feet, or something like that. And you've got ruler flat response. He did have to put a couple of subs up pretty close to the ceiling, right?
Yes.
But we're talking like ruler flat response with no EQ at all, I think. Isn't that right? I'm pretty sure there was no EQ at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had several customers who've gotten, kind of amazing results that I sort of hesitate to talk about too much because results may vary, as they say. One guy, he on his system, he had a Meridian processor which had like 240 channels of equalization, and when he put the swarm in, he reset the Meridian. He'd had the Meridian processor professionally calibrated when it was originally installed with the subwoofer he had before. And anyway, he installed the swarm and set all the processor equalization circuits back to flat, and had the technician come in. Technician took all his measurements. The only change he made was to the level of the swarm amplifier. Okay, how loud it was. He didn't use any of the Meridian equalization that he had available. And he said, and he was, experienced technician, he said he'd never seen anything like it. Now, again, as I say, results may vary, we don't promise that, but the concept seems to work well.
Well, that's it. I kind of avoided DSP, and I know a lot of people love it, and some people are excellent at it, but my understanding is it's really good for putting, as long as you're in the hot seat, it's great. And if you walk anywhere else, things kind of fall apart sonically.
Yes.
And I kind of like to get up and move around and not have jarring audio changes. So.
Well, another issue can come up with using DSP in the bass region. Okay, someone was asking about time alignment. Okay, there's usually some latency. Okay, that latency may be, 5-10 milliseconds, something like that. Okay, now it's as if your subs are 5 or 10 feet further away than your mains. Okay, so now what do? If do you want to delay your mains? Well, now you're going to run your mains through a digital processor to delay them. If you're already using it, then it's probably okay. But yeah, I prefer to try to present a solution that does not rely on digital signal processing. And then if someone wants to improve things a bit with DSP, they're free to. If someone would rather not have that in the signal path, then they're free to not have it.
Yesterday you had a wood little horn.
Oh, yes, we do other things too. We pay
Yeah.
attention to the rest of the spectrum. Okay, let's see. I'm into directivity control, as is Andrew Jones and Clayton Shaw, who you all interviewed.
Yeah.
And I get there mainly by using a constant directivity waveguide style horn. This is an oblate spheroid designed using our Earl Getty's equations. It's approximately 90-degree pattern, minus 6 dB at 45 degrees off axis, and we cross over to, this one is designed to cross over to a 10-inch diameter midwoofer at about 1.4 kilohertz, which is about where the midwoofer's pattern has narrowed to 90 degrees. So that's our approach to pattern control, and our reasons for doing so are the same as Andrew and Clayton. We're doing pattern control. We're doing a narrower pattern than either one of them are. Okay, and the reason for that is I like to minimize the amount of energy and early reflections in the room as much as I reasonably can at the speaker, and without relying on room acoustics to do that. Mm-hmm. And then there seems to be a sweet spot as to how much reverberant energy sounds good to the ear in the room, and a narrow pattern speaker usually does not have enough reverberant energy to really hit that sweet spot. So we add some more reverberant energy, spectrally in a way that ends up being spectrally correct. And we do that with something we call a space generator that is incorporated into the super stand that Jim mentioned, and into most of our loudspeakers. And basically it's a second driver, or sometimes driver array on the rear of the cabinet that is aimed so that it arrives after a fairly long time delay. And you want me to go off on that tangent now, or?
Well, we had a couple of more questions.
Okay,
here
okay,
on
let's hit those.
Somebody said they have their subs outboard of their stand mount speakers, or their freestanding speakers.
Okay. And
wondered if that was a good placement, or if they could play with phase and move them around.
Absolutely, play with phase and move them around. Absolutely. I would suggest placing them asymmetrically is assuming that they're being crossed over lower than say 80 hertz or so. Play around with placing them asymmetrically. If they're placed symmetrically, there tends to be too much alignment of their natural in-room peaks and dips, and we want them to be different. So place one, say, on the wall that your speakers are on, okay, not quite in the corner, and then the other one on the side wall, but kind of close to that front corner, but a different distance from the front corner than the first one is. Try something like that. And if you want to play around with phase, maybe both of them on the side walls, but again, slightly different distances from their corners, and placing the two subs on sidewall will maximize the subjective benefits from playing around with phase.
Great. Let's see. I think we had something else here. No, we covered that. Someone says they have a 300B amp with a 16 ohm output. There aren't many high efficiency modern speakers with higher nominal impedance than 8. Wondered if you offered a higher impedance speaker.
We will, okay? We have in the past, and we will in the future. And I happen to be a dealer for Atmosphere, output transformerless tube amps. And so they tend to have a high output impedance, as do many single-ended triode amps.
Right.
And so I very much design with compatibility with specialty tube amps in mind. And 16 ohms is on the menu.
Great.
Duke, would it be appropriate maybe to be a little bit more descriptive about the Jazzy 112 that we talked about earlier?
Oh, okay. That the one with the single 12 would be an 8 ohm speaker.
Oh, okay, okay. No, we talked about so many speakers.
Yeah.
I guess. Oh, okay. I know which one. Then that would be the one with 215s.
Yes. We do have something with our statement speaker. Forthcoming, we'll have two 15-inch woofers, and it will be a 16 ohm speaker, and it will use a much larger variation on this theme. It will be a actually 22 inches across, but the actual horn itself, effective horn
The throat
section will not be that big, because it will have a full round over. It'll sit perched on top of the cabinet, and then the cabinet underneath it. And it will be a little bit narrower pattern, and we'll use a 1.4 inch throat compression driver so that we can push the crossover frequency down lower. Clayton, I believe, talked about some of his designs that have a unusually low crossover frequency for a two-way, 600 hertz, 500 hertz ballpark.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not quite going to get that low, but man, I totally approve of that idea. When you can get everything phase coherent from about 700 hertz on up, lots of good things happen. You have your overtones arriving at the same time, and that benefits dynamic contrast and clarity, intelligibility. All kind of good things happen. And so anyway, going off on that tangent. Sorry, that's a lot more than answering the 16 ohm question, but yeah, 16 ohms will be in that.
I know it's a known thing for everybody, but it always surprises me that a big pair of speakers can be so much more efficient than a small pair of speakers. And if you want to run a single-ended triode, that's what you're looking for, something
yes
good
yes.
sized.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, okay, Jim mentioned a 112 speaker that we'll be doing that will be it will be an 8 ohm, not a 16 ohm speaker, but it will be high efficiency 96, 97 dB, and that's a conservative 96 or 97. That's not with downhill run and the wind at our back, and and it will work with quite a few lower powered tube amps, assuming they have 8 ohm taps. So it'll be big, but not huge. And the way we avoid huge is we pass off the bottom 2 octaves to multiple subwoofers, so we don't have to build gigantic. Now, not that there's anything wrong with having a gigantic horn bass, okay, but for a lot of people, it's just not practical.
Right.
Any other questions?
Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your background? Like, how did you get, where did you come from? How did you get into this?
Okay, Jim, you want to go? I've been yakking a lot.
Okay, I'll start. Let me see. I started playing guitar when I was pretty young, I guess 9 or 10 or 8 maybe. And then I got into a band with some classmates in grammar school. I think we were called the Paul Bears. Pretty good name, huh? Let me see. And then I hooked up with a local neighbor that was a musician, and we built a little studio at his house. It was terrible, but I didn't know better at the time. And he wrote some pretty nice original music. And then I guess it was around that time, maybe around age 18, I hooked up with a really, really, truly wonderful person, Dr. Patrick Gleason, at then it's a studio in San Francisco it was called Different Fur Trading Company originally, out in the Mission. Huge, beautiful, like 8 foot, 9 foot, beautiful wood doors. And it's in the middle of the Mission. It's still there. I think it's just called Trading Company. That's where Herbie Hancock recorded Headhunters. That's probably their most renowned work. And I got to know John Vieira, the engineer there. Great little studio. Whoops. Sorry about that. Hopefully he stopped doing that soon. Let me see. Patrick privately tutored me on synthesizer. And I had a couple of synthesizers that were used in pop music at the time, the ARP 2600 and the EML 101, which, by the way, Duke, Ralph Carson still owns an EML 101 synthesizer. We're talking analog dials, Alps pots from the late 70s or early 80s, whenever. And so anyway, Dr. Gleason was offering, people that want to learn how to play the synthesizer. So I think he was personally every bit the expert that then Walter, now Wendy Carlos, was on the synthesizer. He synthesized just with his ARP. Oh, I guess he did use the Big Moog, which I did get tutored on also. Synthesizer. He did a full symphony orchestra, and I still have that record somewhere. And it's actually, considering what it is, completely analog. It's nothing short of phenomenal. It's just a phenomenal piece. So I took that training, and then I started doing classes at, I don't know, does anybody remember Blue Bear Waltz's school of rock school in San Francisco? No, nobody on the screen does. Well, I was teaching synthesizer and acoustics there for a bit, and then I ended up at the record plant in Sausalito and worked there with Power of Power, Roy Buchanan, New Riders of the Purple Sage.
Yeah.
I don't know. So am I going on too long? Do I need to stop?
No.
This is interesting.
There's nothing in the world like being in a control room of a studio and Doc Kupka walking in and just coming up behind your back and blowing a few notes out of a baritone saxophone. The only time my innards of my body moved that much was maybe at a 49er game. So with it's known as the catch 2, but I just remember, like, you know, your internal organs are rearranged by that thing. It's just talk about the horn effect. So anyway, after that, that's pretty much it. Then I decided to get a real job and make some real money. So, but that's most of my career. And then Duke and I hooked up because I was going to move from California here to Utah, and Duke, you know, saw that and said, "Hey, why don't we hook up?" And the rest is history there.
Thank you.
Great.
Duke, what's your background?
Well, when I went off to college, I squirreled away a little bit of money and wanted to buy a stereo system. I never really owned one. And so I went to the local hi-fi store and picked out a stereo system and brought it back to my dorm room. And had to have help carrying the speakers because, hey, you know, big speakers, you know, that's got to be better. The guy in the room next to me, Jim Susky, he had these little bitty speakers. Well, not totally little bitty, but Infinity Model Q, maybe QA, I don't remember exactly. And dang it, they sounded better than my great big speakers. I'm like, wow, what is going on? You know, big speakers are supposed to sound better. Well, okay, that kind of got me started. So I started hitting the hi-fi stores a bit more and fell in love with Freed or IMF loudspeakers with transmission lines. So I went through a phase as a amateur speaker builder, building transmission lines, and I built more bad transmission lines than you can shake a stick at. Finally, at one point a bit later in life, I had the opportunity to spend a bit more money, and I bought a pair of Sound Lab full range electrostats, and they were just fantastic. I'm actually still a Sound Lab dealer and just love them. And one of the things Sound Labs do right is they get the reverberant field right, because they're a 90-degree, they radiate into a 90-degree arc front and back. And so their back wave energy has exactly the same spectral balance as the front wave. And I think that plays a very significant role in what they do well. In 2001, I think it was, I went to CES for the first time, and I heard a couple of different horn speakers there that just kind of rearranged my paradigms. They were the only rooms I remember going into that I was going, wow, this competes with my Sound Labs, at least in some ways. You know, this does, you know, things better than the Sound Labs. Sound Labs do some things better, but this is really something amazing going on. Those were classic audio reproductions, now called classic audio, and Edgar horns. And so, since I recognized one of the reasons the Sound Labs sounded so good was their radiation pattern control, I thought, I'm going to make a horn speaker with radiation pattern control. I'm going to use a constant directivity, 90-degree pattern horn, cross over to a big woofer where the patterns match up, and that's the greatest idea ever. Well, okay, JBL did it 20 years before me, so you know, so much for originality. The Model 4430 studio monitor. In pursuing this idea, someone suggested that I contact this guy named Earl Geddes. So I called up Earl or emailed him, whatever, and we got in touch, and we started working together on this project. And at one point he said to me, Duke, what we're doing here is very similar to something I've wanted to do for many years. Let's go into it as partners. You pay for the parts and I'll provide the engineering. So we worked together for a while on the project that became his Suma, his first and in its upgraded version, still his landmark speaker.
Mhm.
I had to drop out after a while. My ability to hold up my end of the bargain kind of died off there. And so Earl completed the Summa on his own. For a little while, I assembled Summas for him. So I'm, quite familiar with the design. And most of what I do traces back to Earl Geddes in one way or another, with a little bit of Roger West from Sound Lab thrown in. Because I think that having, rear firing energy that's spectrally correct is a really good idea, in addition to getting the first arrival sound right. So I guess the way I became a manufacturer, we had moved from New Orleans to Idaho in 2005, and I planned to open up a small audio store. Had a space that was being customized for me in this little shopping area in the little town of Preston, Idaho. And very shortly before we were set to open, the building burned to the ground. Unfortunately, it burned to the ground without us having insurance because of small town politics. Our business license had not yet been approved, and you have to have a business license before you can get business insurance, because up until then it's a hobby. And so we lost everything in it. So the only thing I had left, I had my Parasound amplifiers. So obviously I'm a Richard Schramm fan, and I had a blowtorch preamplifier. And anyway, I sold the blowtorch and put the money into test equipment and became a speaker manufacturer. Like I said, I've been an amateur speaker builder for many years. And if I can just rewind a little bit and a little bit about when I was an amateur speaker designer. At one point, back in the 80s, I managed to borrow some a microphone, a high quality microphone, and I guess it was a real-time analyzer or something like that. And I was going to tweak my crossover to get flat response. Now this was flat in-room response. It was not time gated. I didn't understand that wasn't really appropriate anyway, that you needed to do time gating. And as I tweaked the crossover and got closer and closer to flat, it sounded worse and worse. But I had faith. I persevered. I knew that the promised land was flat response. And when I got there, it would magically, everything would snap into focus and it would sound great. And I got my in-room response over most of the spectrum, not down in the bass region. It was about, I think, plus or minus like 1.5 dB, just really remarkably smooth for 1980s. And it was about the worst sounding speaker I had ever done. And so I started going to Tulane University bookstore at night and reading articles, Journal of the Audio Engineering Society, Acoustical Society of America, Wireless World, trying to figure out where the goalposts are. What sounds good, and it seemed that back in the 60s and 70s there had been a competition between two schools of thought on where the goalposts are. One was get the first arrival sound right. The other was get the in-room response right, the summed omnidirectional response, the power response right. And so papers were written and disputed, and when the smoke finally cleared, the first arrival sound guys won, but not by a big margin. Okay. And so I figured that the thing to do was get the first arrival sound right and get the reverberant sound right, get them both right. And so that's what I've been trying to do pretty much ever since. I didn't have the tools to do that until I met Earl Geddes and learned how to do radiation pattern control. So, okay, I'm done.
Well, it's funny because, I took up what I thought was a smart thing. I said, I'll just build a speaker. Can't be that hard.
Yeah.
And as I was doing research, that's when I hit Siegfried Linkwit's site.
Yes.
And started reading and decided this guy knows maybe a little bit more than I do. And I saw he's willing to share his designs. I mean, you know, a small license fee.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard the speakers, it was one of those, oh my God moments, because you could walk between the speakers and high five the drummer. As long as you didn't trip on his hi-hat, you were good. It was crazy. And as soon as you go through past the speakers, the guy was on the other side of the room. And I have a room that works perfectly for that. I can cook in the kitchen and turn around and have a huge sound field, live sound field, where I usually sit, you know, just by crossing that barrier. Yeah, that's remarkable. We had another question here. You mentioned space enhancement, and Roland's asking, do you have a space enhancement speaker that can be used with other speaker brands?
Yes, we do.
He feels it's real narrow and the way it's output, and he'd like a little more reverberant. So
I just posted the link to my Facebook page.
Okay.
And if we scroll down there a little bit, on the right, you'll see a product called the Space Generator. And the pictures that you'll be looking at are the prototype. So I have in my computer the image of the production cabinets at the shop, but they're just, you know, that wouldn't. Anyway, it will give you a good idea if you look there at what it looks like. And what it is our current best, and this has been the best space generator products for about almost 2 years now, the horns.
I think so, yeah. It's been
close
about 2 years since I rethought it.
So we've got the big horn, which is what you'll see in those pictures there at the space generator section on Facebook, and little bighorn. And the bighorn is the best. It's the most refined. It has the best pattern control. It's bigger. And the purpose of the little bighorn was so that we could fit it within products like the new Super Stand and some other products. I'm sure we'll eventually put it in a smaller scale version of the bighorn, obviously. And I'm sure Duke can go into very fine mechanical, electrical detail about it. But if Roland apparently has a speaker with narrow dispersion, and this would probably be a really, really perfect accessory speaker and very easy to drive. I forgot the production impedance is going to be around 35 ohm or so.
About 32 ohms for the bighorn space generator.
Okay, bighorn will be well, if you go to well, that particular customer, he's the gentleman, one of the nicest people, and he's driving that with a 10-watt amp parallel with his Kane and Kane Abbey, and his own, in his own words, he said it's like invisible. The space generator, he didn't think it made, there was no degradation, no loss of current or anything. So that's with a 10-watt OTL. I think he's in a pretty moderately near field situation. He sits not too far away, maybe 7 feet or 8 feet. I can't remember, something like that, maybe away from the speaker. Let me see. The production model just is going to have so many adjustment features on it, including well, I should be quiet now because I might start confusing you with the adjustments on this the current Super Stand. The philosophy here, I'm sure Duke can go and fill in a lot of blank spots here, but the philosophy here is if you've got a narrow pattern speaker to begin with, and that's right up our alley, so to speak. And what the space generator does is it's high pass cross. I don't want to say exactly where because I don't even know, but it's doesn't go down. It's a horn. It's a wide range horn, but it doesn't go down obviously into the bass range. And if you position it as you're looking at our customer has it there, and think about the path length firing up towards the ceiling, towards the front wall in front of the listener, and then maybe taking an angle up to the ceiling or on the ceiling and then back to the listener. That path length, even in a smallish room like our customers, wow, look what my friend did. There we go. That path length approaches Earl Getty's. It's a great target, but Earl at least is someone with a lot of letters after his name and of great authority in this world of audiophile land, who has established a 10 millisecond delay target. It's not a concrete target, and it depends on the frequency range, but in the range that we're dealing with here, 10 milliseconds is a target. It's 11.25 feet, 1125 feet per second divided times 100th of a second. So there we go, 11. So you're getting, if you've got a narrow pattern speaker, you're not getting hardly any unwanted early reflections. It's kind of like a nice sharp flashlight, signal from each speaker, not really that tight, but that's the idea here. And then this flood of sound arrives about 10 milliseconds later, and I'm completely hooked on it. I have customers that are totally addicted to it. They don't want to ever give it up. And the sensitivity for the Bighorn will go up to a matching speaker of up to about 95-ish. Duke, is that about right?
I think so. We'll have to find out, the hard way. But it, possibly higher than that.
Maybe even higher.
Don't know. Yeah.
And it's an infinite volume control on that one, right? It's going to be a volume control that will go down to any low sensitivity, not something really, really low. It's an infinite passive level control. Duke, why don't you take over and talk about all the control features that will be on that wall, so I don't confuse it with the Super Stand.
Okay. Let's see on the okay. First, let me say this. For the narrow pattern speakers, if they're a large, like a floor standing speaker, then probably the space generator system will be what makes most sense. If they're stand mount speakers, it might make sense to do the super stand. The super stand incorporates a downfiring ported subwoofer with a space generator horn section, and it's a little bit more optimized for the smaller speakers, such as might go on a speaker stand. And the reason we call it the super stand is because there's just not enough hyperbole in high-end home audio these days. So anyway,
but it's all one word. It's a new spelling for super stand.
So
how can you not love that?
So let's see. Okay, I lost my train of thought with my bad joke there.
Control features.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
You're contrasting the horn in the super stand.
Yes.
The horn.
Yes. Okay. And okay. So the Bighorn will have level control. There'll be a control for the top end tilt. In other words, how much with the frequency response of it is tipped up a little bit or tipped down a little bit at the top end, based on room acoustics, or what blends the best with your speakers or whatever. And an area where a lot of speakers have an off-axis anomaly is that in the crossover region between the midwoofer and the tweeter. Okay. Andrew Jones talked about this in his interview, that the midwoofer's pattern will typically narrow just below the crossover region, and then we cross over to the tweeter, and of course it has a very wide pattern because it's very small in relation to the wavelengths, and he sort of focused on the dip at the top end of the midwoofer's range. I focus on the off-axis peak at the bottom end of the tweeter's range. It's just sort of a different way of looking at exactly the same phenomena. So if you have in effect an off-axis peak at the bottom end of the tweeter's range, say between 2 and 4, maybe 5 kilohertz, okay, that's the region where the ear is most sensitive. And so we don't want to be adding a lot of off-axis energy there because you've probably already got it. So one of the features that we have for our space generator section that are designed to be used with other speakers is you can adjust the loudness. You can put in a dip in that 3 to 4 kilohertz region to offset the off-axis peak in that region. Now, some speakers don't have an off-axis peak in that region. Okay, then you just set the controls so you don't have a dip there. And I think that covers the controls that we have.
No, you missed the low high switch.
Yes,
for the high pass filter.
yes. Okay,
I hate
one other
saying that, by the way. It's a low high switch for a high pass filter.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
Right. So there is one other switch. Whether the bottom end of the space generator horn goes down as low as possible, or rolls off a little bit higher. And again, that just has to do with blending well with the off-axis response that is native to your speakers.
I want to mention that, well, I'm going to ask Duke a question because I haven't seen it yet, but on the Bighorn space generator, will the notch that you were just talking about a minute ago, that going to be continuous control the same as on the Super Stand?
It looks like it's going to be a switch.
Okay. Oh, that's right. We talked about that.
Yeah. I just can't put in enough range of adjustability with a continuous control for it to really be useful.
But we do have that on now, which you can see if you go to my website. You can see the Super Stand has just a totally cool continuous notch control at full counterclockwise, no effect, and at maximum that's full counterclockwise, and at maximum clockwise, you would have the greatest effect of that notch.
About -6 dB, I think, something like that.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So the additional sonics from this kind of fill out the sound stage, and what is this sonically for me? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Two things. The smaller thing is what we were just now talking about with the, adjusting the frequency response of this extra reverberant energy, sort of to zig where your speaker's off-axis energy zags, and so that decreases the discrepancy between the first arrival sound spectral balance and the reverberant sound spectral balance. So there's a timbral improvement there, but then the other the spatial aspect, in my opinion, this is a lot more interesting than multiple subs. Okay. Okay, as I mentioned early on, or it may have been before we went live, there is in effect a competition within the listening room between the room acoustics and the acoustic signature of the recording venue. Whether or not the acoustic venue is those cues are manufactured, engineered, or real picked up by the microphones. Okay, so what we want to hear is the recording venue, assuming it's a good recording, and not our playback room. What happens in practice is the playback room signature is superimposed on top of the spatial signature of the recording. And this is going to be really counterintuitive, but we're going to add reflections, and you're going to hear less room and more recording. Okay. Now, most of the there are three ways primarily that the ear judges the size of the room that we're in. Okay, the first is the early reflections, the second is the reverberant tails, and the third is where in time the center of gravity of the reflections is. So what we want to do is do as many things as we can to minimize, like I said, the small room signature, and that is primarily conveyed by the early reflections. All right, the playback, the signature on the recording is primarily conveyed by the reverberation tails. Now, the in-room signature, the in-room recordings, try again, in-room reflections are what are the carriers of the recording venue's signature. In other words, those reverberation tails are primarily conveyed to us by the reflections in the room. Yes, they do come directly from the speakers, but that's the worst direction for reflections to come from. When reflections come from exact same direction as the first arrival sound, that's when we're most likely to interpret them as coloration, okay, because the ear doesn't process them differently because they're arriving from different directions. So what we want to do is minimize those early reflections. We do that with our radiation pattern control. So now we're starting out by minimizing the signature of our playback room. Now we want more energy in the reverberant tails. So we're adding some additional late arrival energy that is going to contribute to those reverberant tails. And also this later arriving energy is going to shift the center of gravity of the reflections back in time. So we're okay without this, the depth of the image will be determined by largely determined by how far away this wall is. Okay, the energy from the speaker, some of it will wrap around and reflect off the wall. And as a ballpark first approximation, your depth of image will probably be about twice the distance from the front of your speaker to the wall. Okay, but now we're getting this long path length cue that is telling us, wait a minute, the wall is way back there. Okay, and so now we get much more sense of depth, assuming it's on the recording. Okay, so we have we're essentially tricking the ear brain system into thinking it's hearing the characteristics of a much larger room. When there are competing characteristics, small room and large room, the ear will generally pick the small room as the dominant ones. That's why in a recording studio, they go to so much trouble to minimize the acoustic signature of the playback room. Now, they don't make it anechoic because they want the engineer to hear room to hear room reflections that adds to his ability to clearly hear what's on the recording. Okay, when he's engineering the recording, but generally they go to a lot of trouble to minimize those early reflections so that the control room that he's sitting in does not dominate over the acoustic signature that his microphones have picked up and that he's processing into the recording, because he wants to hear what the recording really sounds like without his control room being superimposed on top. So we're doing as much of that as we can at the loudspeaker stage without relying, without saying, okay, well, you buy these speakers and the great speakers, then you hire an acoustician to fix your room. Okay. So we're trying to make it as room friendly as we possibly can, because well, we think that pays very big dividends. So anyway, ask questions. I may have rambled.
I think too, I want to say that I think too that I go into great depth on my website about how it's obviously it's right there in all the reviews with a full range speaker. There's these two goals of trying to get the bass right, but then get the mid-range right, and it's nothing but a compromise, and that's the actual word they use. I finally settled. How many times you read that in the review? I finally settled on this particular location. In other words, like, neither one's perfect, but I got it where the bad points are at least showing up in this situation. I think it very much is the same thing with everything that Duke is talking about right now, just in the spatial things and trying to get the right mix of some certain type of late arriving energy versus direct energy. So it's that same contrasting thing. And I just have to say it's totally self-serving, but I think the combination of the tight pattern on the early arriving with very minimal, as little as possible, early arriving reflections, followed by exactly what Duke's talking about, pretty much like just a thick, dense wall of late arriving energy is just a great combination, and I wouldn't want to go back and not have it.
Well, in a way, this is like you were talking about Roger West and the Sound Labs.
Yes,
That's kind of built into their design.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
You pull them out 5 feet from the wall, and
Yeah.
you got exactly what we're talking about. Now,
Right.
with one difference, we have adjustability to how loud that rear wave, if you will,
Right.
is.
Yeah.
We've done some blind listening, and there seems to be a sweet spot at which you get benefit without any detriment. If the late arrival energy is too loud, clarity starts to be degraded just a little bit. And it was interesting. Jim and I independently, using a remote control to adjust the loudness of the space generator section, independently, we came up with the exact same setting to within the resolution of the system of 1 decibel. Okay, so so we so we think that being able to independently adjust the reverberant field, independent from the direct sound, is a nice advantage to have. And the optimal adjustment on the knob may well change from room to room, from setup to setup, and so that can be dialed in.
Yeah, when I was experimenting with that, I was listening to John Williams' classical guitar album, and I'm almost positive, just listening to it, it just definitely somehow get the sense that it's synthetic. All the reverb is synthetic, but I have played some of the best guitars. I'm not a great, I haven't even been playing the guitar for quite a while, but I have played definitely some of the best guitars in the world. And really, in fact, I used to be business associate with some of the best, very, very best art shop guitars, which are made about a mile from where I'm sitting right now, by Ryan Thorell. And I remember at one show that I did get to play a $25,000 Santa Cruz guitar. And that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But I played vintage Martins, and that the best vintage Martins, they have a kind of a unique tone, which is great. But I've never played anything like that guitar. And so I kind of know what guitars sound like firsthand. Acoustic guitar is the best. And so listening to that particular John Williams CD, I had a remote control just in the space generator. It's not needed, but for this experiment, it was very helpful. And I think I mentioned to Duke independently, before Duke ever mentioned to me, that I think that pitch perception was even improved. And then Duke later went on to mention to me that not Earl, but Floyd Toole, Dr. Yes. Floyd Toole, mentions that these things, all these things that we're talking about, will increase pitch perception. I just briefly remember somebody mentioned to me on a forum that just on a blog or a thread that my speakers don't distort pitch. And of course I didn't reply to him, but the notion that a speaker, that there's no difference in pitch perception between one speaker and another, I personally find ridiculous. But so a lot of things happen though, turning it up and then turning it down, and just really listening over time, over and over again, not just one day. Of course, the fingering technique was improved, and when it was exactly spot on. Pitch perception improved. The mix between the wood tone, both on the fingerboard and on the top of the guitar, all improved. And that just fine point mix of just John Williams just sitting there, playing a guitar, although it sounded like a much bigger room than mine. And getting back to the pitch perception, I think that getting all of these ingredients really perfect, it absolutely increases pitch perception. And here's one of the big benefits. I don't know if I'm the only one that's heard classical music, and sometimes on occasion, and it's just kind of like you get kind of bored or whatever. You just kind of want to turn it off and go do something else, watch TV or whatever. But I think the ear gets fatigued trying to discern all the counterpoint, and getting the pitch perception really, really spot on with the space generator. I noticed that I appreciate more complex music, flat out, no question about it. I absolutely do. I'm not going to say I always want to listen to more complex music, but in listening to it, able to pick out all the different counterpoints, all the different things that are happening, and not get tired. And I think that that's one of the great things about this, is that Duke can explain it better than me. I think that it's kind of like you've exercised your brain, and your ear brain function is working better, and it makes you more relaxed and get into the music and appreciate it more, etc. So Duke can cover that more maybe, but that's my 2 cents.